Thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you're watching or listening to this from. My guest today is joining us from a very rainy Copenhagen, as she says, and is someone who I deeply respect for her incredible accomplishments in marketing. Meet Jennifer, or Jen, as most of us call her. Jen is the VP of Growth at Onomondo and was named Nordic Women in Tech Digital Leader for 2023. Jen also comes with extensive experience in global marketing, having worked across 4 countries. She's also a published author, an advisory board member, a mentor, and a co host of the Marketing Corner podcast. She's spoken at various tech conferences globally, including the SaaSiest in Malmo, the Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen, Inbound in Boston, and SaaStr in London. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's lovely to talk to you again. We go back a long time, so it's really nice to see you and yeah, catch up. So how are you?
I'm doing great, but thanks again for doing this on such a short notice. And I know you've just become a mom for the second time, so obviously you're juggling a lot of things. But just to kick off the conversation, Jen, I want to talk to you about this buzzword that we've often heard in our marketing circles called growth hacking. Uh,
Mhm.
the vagueness of this domain has turned it into an overused word, if I'm being honest, and it does not help that the nature of growth marketing work continues to change as all these tools and tactics evolve, right? So I'm curious, as somebody with deep expertise in this particular area, what is your definition of growth hacking?
Mm. I kind of think it's a bit of bullshit as well, if I'm honest. I think it's definitely a buzzword. And I think the thing that I take issue with is the word hack. For me, hack sounds like shortcuts. It sounds like there's this tiny secret, and if you just figure this thing out, you're gonna have the hockey stick and everything else. And I'm sorry, excuse my language, but it's bullshit. Anything worth doing is there's no shortcuts. It takes work, it takes time, and so I take a little bit of issue with this idea that you can hack your way to sustainable growth. I think it kind of exploded alongside the growth at all costs era that we kind of lived through at Dixa, where it was the COVID times. You get a lot of money, you get that hockey stick, and that coincides very well with this idea of hacking things. And the thing that I learned through that experience of hacking and Corona and things is there's no shortcuts. And so I'm a big advocate for let's do things right. Let's do things holistically. Let's stop hacking. Let's stop taking the shortcuts, and let's do things the way they should be done.
Touche. And this is a good point and a good place to bring this up. I'd love for you to share maybe an example of a so-called growth hack that you have found particularly to be overrated or even counterproductive, and what might be a more sustainable approach that you'd recommend instead.
Ooh, where to start? I think one of the, I don't know if this is necessarily a hack, but this is something that I've flipped on its head and seen amazing results, is this idea that you have to dump all your money in Google. Ignore branding. Branding's not that important. You need to win the SEO game, the SEM game. That's where you're going to get your revenue. I don't believe in that. I think you need to invest in branding. I think branding is super, super crucial. And I think a lot of people don't take it seriously. They think it's a waste of time because you can't measure it. And that's what I mean by these kind of shortcuts of dump a lot of money in Google. Yes, it's important. SEO is important. All of that is important, but it's all important. And your branding is just as important. So when it talks, you'll hear a lot of people say, when it comes to budget allocation, for example, 70%, 80% of your budget on demand capture, that Google ads, those free demos, those free trials, or whatever that get that email, right? That's the thing that everyone wants to get, because that's something you can point to and say that worked. It's working. And I flip that on its head. I actually do 70% of my budget on branding initiatives and 30% on demand capture. Because if you get the branding right, if you can build up the brand in the right way, then you're going to get those brand searches. You're going to get that direct traffic, and that's much cheaper. It's more sustainable. The reason that people don't like doing this is it takes work. It takes time. It's not attributable. You have to figure out your positioning. You have to figure out your USP. You have to figure out what makes you special and why people should pay for your product. And people don't really want to do that. They just want to outbid the other guys. So I think maybe that's the first thing that pops in my head of focusing just as much on branding, if not more, as you would on demand capture.
Interesting. And Maybe I just want to double tap on something you said just before this, which is I think there's a common belief that rapid growth is it's always desirable, and we've seen it live. But based on your experience, especially with different global markets, can you talk me through a situation where a slightly slower, more deliberate growth was actually beneficial for an organization or a company that you were working with? And I also want to understand how you today, how do you balance these short-term gains in the context of growth with more long-term sustainability in strategies?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And this is the thing that we haven't cracked it yet. More often than not, slow and steady wins the race. So I have been in organizations where you get a bunch of funding, and as part of that funding deal, your investors want to see a 400% increase in inbound. And that just doesn't happen overnight. It can happen. And I have worked in organizations, and I won't name which ones, where I have been told, we don't care if they become customers. We don't care if they last. We just need to show growth on paper. And so I would say to that company, I can get you leads. I can get my cousins to sign up for a demo if you want to look good on paper. But if you want them to last, if you want to pay them, if you want to have them pay you monthly, if you want MRR, monthly recurring revenue, emphasis on recurring, then that's not going to work. So I would much prefer a slow and steady increase with the right customers. That means turning some people away. That means focusing as much on churn as you do on inbound, as you do on those conversions. Because and I should also maybe put this into context that I'm coming from a B2B SaaS space. So I want those customers to stay. I want them to pay me every month. I want them to grow, because when they grow, I grow. So that's my focus area, is the right customers who are going to grow, who are going to succeed with our product, who are going to tell other people about the product. I'm not interested in selling people something they don't need because on paper it looks good and I've hit my target for the month and I get my commission, and I don't give a shit whether or not they stay in the company. I don't care whether they give CS a hard time. I've done my job. Tick that box. Thank you very much. So I think that's when you talk about hacking, when you talk about these quick wins, that's kind of what you're focusing on, right? But we have CAC is something we need to think about. Customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, CAC and LTV ratios. The emphasis on these metrics is long term. How long are they going to stay with us? What are they paying us over the lifetime? And so those are things that we also need to think about. And that's a much longer lens than monthly, weekly. Sometimes I have weekly targets to hit. So yeah, it's about kind of the long-term focus is where you're going to win the game, in my opinion, rather than the short, fast flash in the pan. Yeah, sure, I'll turn my budget up by a ton, but is it going to be the right people? Probably not.
It's also a good segue into what I wanted to talk to you about next, which was and I'm sure you've seen this because you've also been with a lot of different kinds of startups at various stages. A lot of them tend to heavily focus on user acquisition as a primary metric for growth. But I'm curious to hear, like in your current role as a VP of growth, how do you challenge this notion at the moment, and what other metrics do you prioritize as well? Like, I mean, as a marketing leader or as a growth leader, what other metrics would you ask others to look out for, as opposed to, just user acquisition as a primary metric?
That's a great question. And I think when it comes to, particularly with early stage startups who are looking for funding, that's the thing people want to see. Do you have that first conversion? Do you have that new user acquisition? But the sign of a successful product is people use it, people love it, people recommend other people to use it, they grow with it, so they pay you more if you have a subscription-based model, like a lot of these B2B companies do. So I would say, yes, of course, conversions, SQLs, sales qualified leads. I don't really believe in MQLs. I've talked about this on some other podcasts, but a marketing qualified lead, you gave me an email, great. The end. And that's where you see a big problem with sales, right? Because sales will turn around and say, these are crap. I hit my target. I got my MQL. That's not really holistic. SQLs, I think, is the first real good sign. If sales go, this is great, thank you, then that's the first, I think, thing that you could look at. But for a long-term focus, you need to look at things like customer acquisition costs, which is usually abbreviated as CAC. So how much am I spending to win this customer? Because if you want lots of customers fast and you dump all your money into Google or something like that, that's expensive as hell. Okay, well, I can do that if I put all my money there, but then that cost of acquisition is going to be really, really high. If you want to look at that metric, that's where your branding comes in. If I can get direct traffic, if I can get branded searches, if I can get people who convert on an organic social way, that is automatically going to reduce my CAC. And if that's something we're looking at, that's where you get PLG, for example, and try to make the user journey easy. So I'm a big advocate for looking at how much you're actually paying to acquire customers. I think looking at close time, it's an interesting indicator. It tends to make inbound look very good. So thumbs up from me. But again, if they're closing fast, they're probably small. Do you want to focus on smaller deals? It depends on your business model. The bigger the deal, the longer the sales cycle, right? LTV to CAC ratio, I think, is an important one that people forget. And it's not easy to measure because you need to know over their lifetime, how much are they going to pay you? How do you do that when you've only been in existence for a year? Hard to say, but I think that really breaks down for you. How much are we paying for this customer versus how long they're with us? Because there is absolutely no point in spending, say you spend $400 to win a customer, they pay you 25 bucks a month, but they leave after 4 months, you've lost money. Whereas if you have a smaller acquisition cost, but a longer lifetime with that customer, you're going to make that profit. So I like to look at the long term. In some startups, that's not very popular, probably because they're thinking of selling anyway. So when you're like, oh, in 5 years, you're going to see a really impressive portfolio of logos, maybe they don't want to be around in 5 years. Maybe they want to be sold in 2. And that's where you need to have that transparent conversation and know what is it we're trying to achieve. If you just want to look good to those investors, we can do that. But if you want a long, sustainable company, if you want the Canvas of the world that are going to stick around and provide jobs for people for a really long time, then you need a sustainable growth model, not the hockey stick. And then we don't really care what happens afterwards. Maybe that's a bit controversial, but that's how I feel.
In the context of product-led growth, where do you see the sort of intersection of marketing and product development evolving in the next couple of years, and especially in the context of growth? And maybe let's dive into the case of B2B SaaS, since you come from that industry. I'd love to know where you see this intersection moving.
I'm very excited by PLG. I talk about it a lot in our podcast. I am the owner of PLG in our company as the head of growth, because I do think that that's when we had Corona, for example, right? The last thing people wanted to do was talk to someone. I do not want to talk to a person. I want to look at something. I want to figure out if it works for me, and I want to get it. And so I think if we think about how people buy things today, a lot of companies, a lot of B2B SaaS companies, the customer or the prospect has to fit into their org chart, right? Oh, well, you're a small business, so you're going to talk to a BDR. Oh, you're a medium-sized business, you're going to talk to an SDR. Oh, you're an enterprise. Oh, well, you're over here. Now that you've done this, now you're going to talk to this team over here. There's an onboarding team, or there's an account manager. It's confusing. It's fragmented. It's a pain in the ass. And Harvard Business School actually did a really interesting study, and I'll be happy to share the link with you after our chat, and you can share it with your listeners, that people are willing to pay more for a simple onboarding process, a simple sales process. And for me, that's what PLG forces you to do. It forces you to go through your own sales process and go, why the hell are we doing this? And why are we doing that? Why are we putting obstacles in the way? Let's make this as easy as possible. There's a lot of ways you can do a PLG, and the term growth, not so much growth hacking, but growth, there's a lot of different ways to do growth. And if you follow the Elena Vernas or the Leah Tarines of the world, there's a lot of product is involved with marketing, and you're building things and you're testing things and you're launching and then you're starting again. And I think that's how you really do growth. A lot of us don't have that ability to have engineers in our team. So we do a kind of a hybrid marketing growth role where we work very closely with product. And I think PLG is how it shouldn't be a moneymaker. And that's, I think, the thing that I'd like to emphasize, at least in my experience. It's an efficiency gain. If you can make that sales process easier, if you can remove sales from the small deals and focus them on the more complex deals, you are enabling sales to spend their time more wisely. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to increase revenue by a ton, but you're going to reduce the CAC because you have less people involved in the sales process for smaller deals, for example. So I think for PLG, it simplifies the process for for prospects. If I have to talk to someone to figure out how much you cost, or if I have to talk to someone to figure out if this is right for me, I'm not going to do it. So as a growth marketer, I want to look at that product and go, how do I make this easy? How do I make this so you don't have to call me? How do I make this so it is crystal clear what you're going to get and what you're going to pay? And that's where I work very closely with product. And then the other benefit of a PLG is it will free up and enable your sales team to focus on complex deals. If your CS team have to answer questions from prospects, it frees them up. You also have to think, how do I remove CS from humans touching this lead until they're paying us money? That will make your long-term metrics of CAC LTV ratio much better.
Interesting. And maybe speaking of teams and people, Jen, how do you go about putting a growth team together today? And what are some of those standout characteristics that you look for outside of the technical and the hard skills?
Great question. So my team at Onomondo is currently 13 people. So we have your traditional demand gen team, which has performance marketing, ABM marketing, and things like that. But we also have a branding team, and that has social media, that has product marketing, that has video, that has in-house designers as well to help keep our brand fresh, keep our brand evolving. We A/B test a lot of things so we can say, even down to colors, you can't test everything, and it's not crazy, but it's nice to have these in-house resources to say, for a technical product like ours, we're the Internet of Things. Video is a really great way to demonstrate our capabilities better than a static ad could. So we have an in-house videographer. And I think the cherry on a growth cake is I have a full stack developer on my team. So he makes the website look good, but it's so much more than that. There's the technical aspect of showing our product, building the PLG, building a free trial. We, like many companies, we have a very strict divide between we own everything up until the product. The second someone logs in, it's product own that. We can't touch it. But how do we make that seamless? How do we build our website to reflect the product? And then we can talk to product and say, maybe we do this, maybe we do that. We've tested this, we've tested that. This works better. So we work very, very closely, particularly our web developer, full stack developer, excuse me. He's going to get mad if he hears me say that. And someone that you actually worked with maybe when we were together at Dixa as well. But it was getting the website and the product to match and to make sense to ease that process. So that's kind of my dream team when it comes to a growth team. Yeah.
And maybe just sort of pivoting from a dream team to a future team, is there one or two like specific skills that you think will be super critical for the future growth teams or future leaders who are looking to build a growth team?
I think this is kind of how I see companies in general changing is there needs to be more, this is going to sound like obvious information, but there needs to be more collaboration between the different departments. For too long, there's been marketing has their targets, sales have their targets, CS have their targets, product are doing whatever product want to do. And everyone's just getting pissed off at each other, right? Because I'm ticking my box and you're ticking yours, but our boxes are different. So I think one of the things that I've noticed, particularly within my team, is that the product marketing side of things getting very, very, very close to product to the point where we had a shared roadmap. So there is a growth marketing or growth product roadmap that we look at. And we say, okay, product, you're building this. So we're going to get ready to promote it to, whether it's a video, whether it's a customer case study, whatever we have to do. And we have to work hand in hand. And at the same time, we have to work obviously together with sales, but we kind of let product run the show. And I think in a lot of places, sales tend to run the show, and that's fine, but it should be product calling the shots on what you're building and why and for whom. I think often in many organizations, we build for everyone. And I'm not a product person, but I love product people very deeply because they're very talented and wonderful people. And they can't build for everyone. They can't. Everyone and their cousin's gonna want some kind of API. Everyone's gonna want some kind of fun feature. We can't do that. We've seen too many times. We've seen it, you and I, right? We've seen, oh, we're gonna build this bespoke thing, and then that customer, that prospect falls through. Well, your team just spent a shit ton of time on something that now nothing's gonna come of it. Whereas you have your core bread and butter customers that could use one thing that will make their lives easier. So I think maybe it's not in terms of growth. I think it's a mentality thing. It's how do I collaborate? How do I look at the big picture and what we're trying to achieve? And that needs to be, I think, product driven. And that's a lot of where product led growth come in, but also just the product team saying, this is what we're going to work on. They'll take in feedback, of course. We'll take feedback from growth. We'll take feedback from sales and CS. Don't forget CS. They're the ones helping customers on the ground. And if there's a bug that's causing a lot of drama, that needs to be fixed. So taking everyone's things into consideration, but making that call, and then we follow their lead and say, then this is what we're going to do. So I think that's a mentality shift. Is kind of answering your question. Rather than a hard skill set, it's being able to look at the big picture and understand how we play our roles as a team.
Right. And maybe I do want to take a hard right at this point. I want to talk about Marketing Corner, which is your podcast. And for everybody who's watching or listening, you must go check it out because I personally think it's a gold mine of information. But tell me, Jen, just hosting a whole bunch of episodes now and speaking to people and just ideating, how has the podcast shaped your own growth philosophy? I mean, has it challenged any of your long held beliefs, or has it introduced you some interesting ideas and ways of doing things?
Absolutely. And thank you for the plug. Casper, my co-host, is going to be very happy about that. Absolutely, it did, because I started the podcast actually when I was still working at Dixa, where I was a very performance marketing focused marketer. So I was looking at the numbers, and we did a lot about attribution and lead gen tactics and things like that. And two things happened. One, we get a lot of requests for people who don't know, we focus on small to one person team armies who have to do big things. They have to act like big teams, right? And we've all been there. We have to do the work of 4 people, but common sense marketing. And so we get a lot of people coming to us with, I'm being asked to do this thing that makes no sense. How do I get my boss to realize that makes no sense? That is a majority of what we get asked. And that's a majority of our episodes is, this is how you build a case. So I think that's a really interesting sort of aspect of marketing. And that's something that's one of the reasons I keep doing it. And that's what I try when I go on podcasts like yours, when I get on a stage. I want to try to evangelize this common sense marketing, because marketers know what to do. We all know what we should be doing. But the people who hire us and the people who measure us don't. And it's not necessarily the marketers, like yes, of course, people love to know what's the latest with, the pixels, or how do I do this? But by and large, people want to know, how do I talk to the stakeholders? How do I talk to C-level? How do I get my boss to understand the thing that they want me to do makes no sense? And that's kind of where I focus now my marketing from that experience is common sense, collaborative marketing that makes sense. So that's kind of where I am now as a marketer of like, let's make this make sense.
And from a sheer experience perspective, because I know you have worked with a lot of founding teams, you worked with the C-suite, not just now, but even in your previous experiences. Tell me what has worked phenomenally well for you in terms of being able to communicate the impact and the ROI that marketing or the growth team is actually bringing to the table. Like, what has worked for you in terms of giving that communication, making it clear, and putting it out on the table?
Data and visualizing the data. This was something I learned early in my career. I was an intern. I was a woman in a male dominated space. And I found that when I had an idea at the table and I just kind of raised my hands, I had a hard time convincing people. But when I show you on a slide deck, this is visually how this is what I'm trying to say. This is the way people are accessing our website. This is where most of the customers are coming from. When I physically show you a visual depiction of what I'm saying, that's when it tends to sink in. And even now, I'm still a woman in a male-dominated space. You are as well. And so I think to be heard, we have to shout a little louder, but we also have to bring the receipts. And that's one of the things that I do as a marketer is I bring the receipts, but I also want to make the data accessible. We marketers, and we've done this to ourselves, we have a bad rep because we use big words that don't mean anything. And so I want to bring it back to let's talk common sense. And I'll give you an example. This is something that I did. So for example, I had to present to the C-level about, my monthly performance and where the best deals are coming from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you just look at the surface, and this is what most people understand because they don't have this deep knowledge of marketing, our number one source of inbound conversions, SQLs, was Google. So I remember my boss, who is someone you might know, saying to me, stop everything you're doing on LinkedIn, stop everything you're doing for branding, and put all of your money in Google because that's where the leads are coming from. And, as a marketer, you're like, no, that's a really bad idea, but I'm saying it, I'm not showing it. So what I started doing is I said, let's look at the number one keyword that is driving these conversions. And that was a branded search. And then the conversation switched because then I could say to them, they're Googling our company name. That is the thing that is driving 70% or whatever it was of these conversions. So I cannot dump more money into this platform because it's not going to change. It's not making people Google us more. What is our social, our LinkedIn presence, our Instagram, I think we're on, our YouTube, all of these other channels is what is making people Google our name. So we need to do more of that. And so that's kind of where I try to almost like marketing for dummies. Don't go in there and try to sound smart because people are going to shut down. Go in there and break it down to the most common, I'm not saying patronize people, but break it down in a way that people understand. Yeah, Google is killing it for us. But what is the thing that people are Googling? It's this thing, and this is where it's coming from. And so kind of, again, visualizing the data, but making it very accessible.
That's actually pretty spot on, Jen. And I think I remember you also kind of reinforcing this back when I was on your team at Dixa, and I'm glad you've still stuck to that. No, I'm serious. I think it's also refreshing to hear that, to be honest. So maybe just to wrap up, I have a very important question because I know you speak at some of the biggest names in the tech conference business and inbound and whatnot. What is the most critical message about growth that you believe that the industry as such is not paying enough attention to, and how do you actually go about illustrating this point to your audience?
I think that's a really great question. It's again, it's the common sense marketing. We have to make it make sense. I did a talk, my talk at SaaSiest, and I'm happy to send you the video if that's something you find helpful. It's not a personal plug, but I compared us to a sports team, and in a lot of B2B, you have everyone scoring, right? Everyone has to score. Growth have to generate revenue. CS have to generate revenue. Sales have to generate revenue. And if everyone is trying to score, then no one's passing the ball. Rather than doing that, let's all play the positions we're here to play, but make it make sense and make it work towards a common goal. CS should not be trying to generate revenue. CS should be helping people. The end. We should generate, but we also have to support. And so I kind of think that we have to think of it like a sports team. The Euros just ended if anyone watches football, but we would be really pissed off if the goalie was constantly trying to score because what are they missing behind them? That's kind of how I feel with our businesses. We're so focused on everyone has to generate revenue. Actually, we're not all here to generate revenue. We're all here to do our own role and see how it contributes to the shared goal. So I think that's the kind of message I want to get across to people when I'm on stages, when I'm on podcasts, is think about what you're supposed to do, understand what marketing is here to do and what it is not here to do, and make sure that we work together. Competing with sales is bullshit. It's tiring. No one likes it. And I talked in a podcast episode about having a chair thrown at me by the head of sales because we did not agree. I think you know what I'm talking about. That's not how we should be doing things. We should be working together. We should be aligned, and it's up to C-level to give us those objectives to make sure that we can figure out our way to go down this path together.